Hi everyone, it is a pleasure to be here, especially seeing all the familiar faces and speaking at home. I am a TCD student as well, so this is the first time I'm presenting officially like this article, so I hope you enjoy and let's start. First of all, I must take, yes, situation is too serious and I have to pronounce myself and I have to call awareness for the political time that Brazil is facing. It's a turmoil. Right now we have in Brazil political prisoners, the absence of human rights, open sky racism, misogyny, all the problems that we are facing. And all these problems directly impact the Brazilian Amazon, so there's no way to dissociate one from the other. So I always like to pronounce myself and call awareness for that. A little bit of the presentation flow here. Let's start the business. There's a brief introduction about Brazilian Amazon, and then we're moving into the study area, description, and a little bit of history, just the methods. We're talking about NDVI and some on-the-ground examples, exactly what do I mean. And then we're moving into the creme de la creme, which are the vegetation coverage maps. After that, we are relating that to the ecosystem services, just 3 of them. So air pollution, noise pollution, and climate regulation. And then we're moving into the final conclusion with the final remarks. It's hidden, but it's okay. So, well, first and foremost, this presentation is on this paper that just came out last November. It's mostly the work that was done in my master's at the Federal University of Pará and was refined a little bit during my PhD. I would like to thank you, my co-author and my master's advisor, Professor Claudio Slavston. Then I'll also thank Dr. Jane Southworth. She was great helping me refine the methodology in the paper, and she is the geography chair here at UF. And finally, last but not least, Alexandra Sable, our Allie right here. She was great. She revised it countless times, and she transformed it, Frankenstein, to something that is digestible, or in this case, it is publishable. I did not continue this research in my PhD. However, I do stick around with talking about the urban Amazon. So when we think about deforestation, what is the first thing that comes to our mind? Great, yes, but no. So to answer this question, first I invite us to reflect on 2 other questions. First, what is the Amazon? What is the Amazon now? And then the second question is, how forest is the Amazon? I was really tempted to write how urban is the Amazon. And that's why I call this paper Deforestation Beyond the Forest. Well, the Amazon is the forest and is the people, right? There's no way we can dissociate the 2 of them. And the Amazon is an urban forest. 70% of the population lives in cities. So the world is urban, so it is the Amazon. No changes. And when I say the Amazon here, just to clarify, I'm talking about the Brazilian Amazon, right? So I totally agree with Bertha Becker. She said that in 1980s, the Amazon is an urban forest. And I vouch for it, and it has not changed, and most likely it won't change. Oops. All right, sorry guys, it's crazy. I'm a geographer. Let's start with the map. And here is the map for those who are not familiar. This is Brazil. The dark blue is the Brazilian Amazon. The light blue is the Brazilian Amazon as well. Then we have my beloved state, Pará, in green. And then the city that we're talking about, Belém, which is the capital of Pará, the 2nd largest city in the Amazon. So one of the largest cities in the Amazon. And that's a nice picture for remote sensors here of how exactly Belém is occupied. Before we're going into the research, I will invite you to know a little bit more about my hometown. So Belém was founded in 1616 And there was, in the 1800s, there was a rubber boom in Brazil. And Belém became very rich and was the entrance to the Amazon and all the market and all the goods. It was known as Paris in America. And after that rubber boom, the city went dormant. So there was this demographic hibernation for a while. Then in 1960s, between 60 and 70, so 1960 and 80s, the population skyrocketed and went. It increased about 134%. Well, that can be explained about the occupation of the Brazilian Amazon and the government projects to transform the Amazon into an area that is productive and developed. I don't know, whatever that means still, but this was the goal. So after that, Belém reached 1 million people probably in the mid-80s. And then today we are 1.5 million people, and the total metropolitan region stands for 2.5 million people. So that is a nice shot of Belém. You can have a good idea. We're very proud people. I don't know if you noticed. We're proud of many things. So we have great music. There's great photography. There's great, there's lots of local rhythms. There's nothing we're more proud than our local food. So in case you think about stopping by, I'll give you all the tours. And this is tacacá and açaí, in case you don't know. Tucupi, all the foods, names you haven't heard of, but you will fall in love, hopefully. Now let's go into the study area. I took this division, so I don't know if you remember from the map in the former slide. So the city is way bigger than what I'm studying. The city is, in fact, 60% insular, so it's composed of many small islands. But this is the core of the city. And for this study, I chose this division, that is this official division, into districts that I call neighborhood blocks or neighborhood chunks. And then we have there's 6 neighborhoods in the blue, 8 in the pink, and 6 more in the yellow. This is kind of what looks like, so you can actually tell there's an occupation boundary right there, and it concentrates over 50% of the city population. We're talking about over 750,000 people. And the reason I chose to kind of treat these areas in separate, so that when I'm analyzing, when I'm trying to identify the loss of vegetation, of green coverage, I didn't want to treat the city like as this homogeneous mess. I wanted to understand what was happening within the city skirts. So that's why I adopted this division. Now going back to the methods, I don't know how much you are familiar with remote sensing, so I basically used NDVI images, and clouds and NDVI images in the Amazon are a great challenge. So I was able to refine and find good images for 86, 1993, 2001, and 2009. That's a 23 period chunk. And to assess the deforestation map coverages, I use NDVI. Again, for those who are not familiar with NDVI, it's a very simple thing. It basically measures the reflectance of green on a certain piece of land. So the more green, the higher the level of reflectancy. And Landsat works with a 30 by 30 image. But I didn't want to use that assumption that what is forest, what is urban green. So today we have urban green. Today there's a forest or tree, and then tomorrow is gone. I would like to kind of assess the density of this loss. So assuming that yes, forests can disappear from one day to another, but assuming that is a kind of a process that happens over time, that is the importance of dividing this range of NDVI. So NDVI values from -1 to 1 are considered no vegetation or water, and the values from 0 to one, that are closer to one. The closer to one it is, the more dense the vegetation is. So for our maps, we have bare soil, there's poor vegetation, moderate vegetation in cyan, and then magenta stands for dense vegetation, and finally a very dense vegetation. What do I mean by that? So I use these images for some training samples as well, but this gives us an idea what do I mean by bare soil. So bare soil exactly is that. There's no green whatsoever. Forget about this. Hopefully it's not, it doesn't count. Everything counts, but so but you can see there's no vegetation on the streets, there's no bush or anything. Everything's like completely urbanized. Oh, I would like to go back just a little bit. So we're assessing the loss of vegetation in an area that was fully, completely urbanized. Technically, there was no urban expansion, there was no urban occupation. This area was completely urbanized. So we wouldn't expect that much of a loss that we're going to see in the maps. Anyhow, so this is what I call bare soil. Whatever bare soil you picture this image. Moving on, we have poor vegetation. And by poor, I mean poor. How many trees do you see here? Exactly. There's one right there. I don't know if you can see it. I'm missing a pointer, but that's okay. So there's one tree right there. And this is what I mean by poor vegetation. Pardon the resolution of the images. I didn't have a nice camera back then. And then we get more happy. This is where vegetation gets moderate. You can see the canopies. You can see there's some shades. You can see there are spaces like void spaces, but there's corridors. And vegetation is, this places is what I call moderate vegetation that stands on that NDVI threshold. Then dense vegetation. This we have like complete corridors, full sets. Remember, we're measuring vegetation within this chunk of 30 by 30, right? So it's how much green that reflects. This is not a tree, but I think it's super important to say it is vegetation and it counts. It's urban shrubbery. It's just green. It's chlorophyll. And this is also a dense vegetation. Moving into the very dense vegetation, in the upper image, it's a park. It's not a closed canopy, but there's a lot of green with that chunk of 30 by 30. This is a cemetery. Look how nice. And this is just a road that takes us to the airport. And hopefully this is a little piece of primary forest. Maybe, I don't know. But it's just, this is whenever we have in mind urban forest or urban very dense green coverage, that's what I meant. Going now, dissecting our vegetation maps. Again, we are starting from the blue. This is where the city starts, like in this nose kind of area right there. And this is where we're going to see the most dramatic changes. This neighborhood, it comes first, and then we're going into the magenta. And then the yellow neighborhood, it's the one that's suffering a lot, but it was the one that was less populated. So if we could explain urban occupation, we could use the yellow area for a good example. Moving into the maps, what do I mean by vegetation coverage? So when I first look at my maps, I cried, and that's awful. I mean, that's what we have. So remember, this is 86, not much of a change from here to here. We're looking for negative portions of bare soil that starts popping up. The yellow stands for poor vegetation. So this is what we had, basically an area that was populated by moderate, dense, and very dense vegetation, of a little change in here, and then it starts to state this discrepancy, and then finally, that's what we have in 2009. There is not much of a difference from the maps between the areas. However, you will see that the other areas, they present like a even darker stage. There's basically this pop-up chunks of bare soil with absolute no vegetation. And whatever we had of magenta, that means dense vegetation, is basically gone. And all the very dense vegetations, they stand for the only city parks. So Belém was known as the Cidade das Mangueiras. So it was full of mango trees. And this is what it's happening from 1986, guys. I mean, some of you are not born, but I was long there. And yeah, and it you know, every time I look at it, I am speechless. So this is the top part, the yellow part of our map. And this area was kind of part of an occupation strategy. So this is why we lost like so many green areas, so many very dense vegetation. You remember the dense vegetation? What do I mean? I mean they're really dense. And not only did we lost that vegetation, but we did not replace it by any form of vegetation. So there's green and there's bare soil, which is zero. No green whatsoever. Now, we're going to go into some numbers, and I'm not going to really dive into numbers, but basically what we find is all areas had a significant increase of bare soil, all areas had a significant increase in poor vegetations, and all areas lost moderate vegetation, dense vegetation, and a very dense vegetation. So there, even though this area, the yellow part, started at 33, there's down only to 7% of the total area as far as dense forest. So
those two numbers represent which years?
Those are from the start to the end. So 86 and 2009. Yeah, this is like the total account. So let me try to find myself. Let's go to ecosystem services. Why am I talking about ecosystem services? Well, first of all, ecosystem services is one of my greatest concepts that I think is like pure poetry. I don't know about you. For some of you that don't know about ecosystem services, there's a great definition here. It's basically the conditions and processes through which natural ecosystems and the species that make them up sustain and fulfill urban life. Yeah, human life. See, I'm so urban. So moving here, I told you there's tons of definitions for ecosystem services, but I really like the first one. I don't know if you can really see it, but it's just very simple. So it's basically benefits people obtain from ecosystem. It's just nature, whatever nature makes for us, whatever nature does for us. And that's our survival. It's entirely upon that. So we're not going to go over all of them. Ecosystem services are divided in 4 major categories. So there's regulation, there's provision, there's support, and there's cultural services as well. We're concentrating on regulation services and just 3 of them. So ecosystem services, nature, forest, green, urban green. So there's no question about that connection, right? You guys are with me. So when we think about that, this is even more important. So given the importance or given the function of nature to maintain and to improve and to sustain urban life, urban vegetation takes a deeper importance into this account. And that is why I'm so interested in the urban areas. It's such a contradictory approach. We're talking about this, in a city that's surrounded by forest. Let's go to the first service, that is air pollution. Well, air pollution, there's tons of ways to measure air pollution. I was lucky enough to have some historic data to come up with this final graph. I'm not considering the differences in trees and canopies and dimension. And I'm taking only one study that assumes that 1 hectare of mixed urban forest, that's just 1 hectare. And by mixed urban forest, I'm just considering very dense and dense vegetation. That can consume, that can process, that can absorb up to 15 tons of air pollutant content from the air a year. So I'm not even considering whatever the characteristics of local tree. There's no studies that measure that, especially in Belize. And that, relating that loss of coverage, that loss of green into whatever the capacity we had in 1986 and the capacity we have to absorb pollutants, that's the total amount of pollutants that were absorbed just by assuming the very dense forest. It's 15,000 tons in one of the neighborhoods, 19,000 tons in another one, and 20,000 tons, and that value significantly decreased just in 23 years, and not considering anything else, just the loss of green forest, of green coverage. Next, we're going to go into noise pollution. Well, we always feel noise pollution, and that's like very pertinent to the urban environment. The World Health Organization says that some 65 decibels, if considered under permanent exposure, right, it is a sound that is beyond bearable. So keep that in mind. Under 85%, if you are on a constant exposure, can cause permanent hearing loss. That's how hard it is. If we're thinking about the unfoldings of noise pollution, in the European Union, there's an estimation that between 0.2 and 2% of the GDP goes into mitigating the effects of urban and noise pollution. If we translate that into our local numbers for Belém, that means 360 million reais. Now we're moving to this part. This is basically Brazilian laws and their maximum standards of noise that is acceptable, especially within the urban areas. So I'll call your attention to the last one, which is the higher threshold. That's 60. That's day. I'm sorry, you can't see because of the screen. So this is daily noise or daytime, and this is nighttime. So we're taking that 70 and 60, and we're already comparing to the thresholds right there. That's what happens in Belém. So there was no historic data for noise pollution. There is one map up to now. It's called the Mapa Acústico, so the acoustic map of Belém. So I couldn't go back in time, but it gives us an idea of how much noise pollution we face. So what are the noise levels in Belém? Oh, let me just go back here, just 1 second. So the methodology I kind of use is that it's also an European methodology that is not taking into consideration any other quality of whatever green we're using. So a dense shrubbery, just that thing that I showed you, that's green, but it's not a tree, about 5 by 5 meters, it's capable of absorbing from 3 to 6 decibels, right? And this is what we're talking about. 3 to 6 decibels is a lot, especially considering that we are already living on the edge. So this is the acoustic map. This is what the data looks like. It gets very impressive and gets very dark and just very purple-ish. And this graph, it's just the compiling of the data that were here from the acoustic maps. And what we see, it's just everything is above our main threshold. Industrial areas, 60s and 70%. That takes into account permanent exposure. So you can see the numbers are not particularly encouraging, and most likely this will get worse if we just consider green vegetation or urban forest or urban green alone. The last service is just temperature, climate, and temperature regulations for the climatologists in the room. There is a difference for the social sciences. We're just going to stick with heat, cool, and that's it. So, again, going back to our urban environment, especially in a city like Belém, a tropic and humid climate where average temperature is just skyrocketing and average maximum and minimum temperature. So it's hot, it's humid, there's low seasonality, there's very few temperature differences in one day. And everybody heard, I'm assuming, the urban heat islands where, you know, some parts of the city just becomes, you know, too hot, and then it just unfolds and overflows that heat temperature, transforming the urban environment into something that is not nice. So we already know how important urban greens, urban trees, urban shrubbery are. And that's also out of the question. So to kind of come up with that, we're considering that just one large tree, again, I'm not a biologist, and I'm not going into what kind of tree, so I'm not going into the species. But if you can find a place with robust trees, I believe it's the Amazon. So one urban tree is capable of decreasing by 2 degrees Celsius, which is about 5 degrees Fahrenheit, kind of, in its surrounding environment. So if you think about 32 Celsius as a maximum average temperature and 24 as a maximum minimum temperature, that's a lot of degrees, and that's a lot of climate change, especially if you're considering a long time and a long-term equilibrium of the urban area. So, yeah.
This is a microclimate, the area immediately surrounding the tree.
Yeah, that's so when you stick more trees together, but it's like you go in the shade of a tree, and you take a thermometer, you can already measure what is the temperature is cooler. So this is done in an European environment, but I think that if I do it in the Amazon, like if I do it in Benin, it's like even more accentuated. So you get more trees, and then it helps. So the absence of urban trees really contributes to urban heat islands, and that's a major problem, considering people are living in cities. Most people are living there, and we do have to worry about urban city livelihood and equality. This is what the minimum temperature in Belém was in 1997. This is the minimum temperature in 2009. This is the maximum temperature in 1997. This is the maximum temperature in 2009. So you can see, just by looking at temperatures, numbers are not nice. They're not promising. And this is basically what I would like to call your attention for. I hope we have this very nice debate. And I would run into my final conclusions. That is my final message. I really appreciate it. So I heard you get points for that on ResearchGate. So, well, isn't it true? Yeah. So I would like to leave you with a message that cities should be seen as a solution rather than a problem. They are a reality, and they're a reality for most of the world. So we are almost already, I think, 80% of the urban population is the world population is urban. 70% of the Amazon population is urban. So there is no turning back. So rather than thinking of a city as a pool of environmental problems, we should think of a city as a pool of possible solutions to keep people living in cities and kind of prevent other areas or other things. But I would like to call your attention that, especially in the Amazon, cities are a reality and they are a solution. They have to be seen as a solution. The other final conclusion, there's a significant loss of urban green. I personally don't see anything that is shifting these numbers. I haven't worked and I haven't updated this map, so this was 2009, so we still have rooms there for updating. Then I hope to do that in the future. I also hope to address what are the drivers between this behind this forest loss. I personally, that's my personal view as a citizen, and I spend most of my life in Belém. I think that we have this weird relationship with the forest. especially within the Amazon, that forest for us for some time, for a long time, meant isolation, meant lack of access to development, to basic services. So the people, the urban people of the forest are kind of, and I mean it in the overall sense, we are not very grateful to belong to the forest, because the forest means there's the Amazon cost. You know, everything is way, it's far, it's more difficult. So there is this culture, like this underneath thing that forest is a problem. So yes, we want concrete, we want glass, we want high buildings. That's, you know, that's development, that's modern, that's how it's supposed to be. So I would really like to go into more deep into the socioeconomic drivers, and also expand and refine the research. I would love to go into the small islands that you've seen. Remember, there was this pink area. There's a lot of small islands surrounding. They're really well preserved up to now, but there is already some suffering. There is already an occupation process, especially the ones right in front of Penang. And those are like the last kind of fortress of forest that we have right surrounding us. And that's basically it. So, thank you.